Hello, I'm Helene and welcome to Cabin Fever Crochet and my little yarn review on Premier Spun Colors yarn, and just started to work with it. I worked up several swatches. I tried at least 4, maybe 5 different stitches, a few different hook sizes. So I'm going to go over with you all of the good and the weird and some solutions and tips as far as working with it. I'd love to know, have you worked with this yarn yet? Which colors? What do you think? Did you find yours to be consistent or have a lot of inconsistencies and from cake to cake, and what you wound up making with it? This is the color Iris. I have several of the colors. It is labeled as a number 4 weight, recommends 5mm in both needles and hook. And in the hook, that would be a USH for Helene. You get 7 ounces, 200 grams, 419 yards, 384 meters. So when I look at the yardage, sometimes it just kind of depends on how the yarn is spun, how light and airy, how tight and dense, whether it works up as a standard number 4 or not. This is 65% acrylic, 35% fine superwash merino, which I would agree with that to some degree, and on other aspects, I don't know about the fine superwash. It doesn't seem to be of the highest grade to me, but some cakes, they really vary from cake to cake, and I found a lot of inconsistencies with mine, not only within each cake, but from different colorways, so I'll get into that. This particular color in this cake feels very soft, very squishy in the cake itself, and I was like oohing and ahhing all over it and thought it was just going to be wonderful. It does have quite a halo to that. Hopefully you can see all this fuzz here. Okay, and that integrates rather well into the stitches working with them. I did find that there are some rather longer hairs from the wool in here that I could easily pick out. This is a semi-roving yarn, so it goes from thicker to thin. Some cakes, for example, this is the color Blue Ridge, as in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and this one was the most consistent, where even though some areas you can see here is much thinner and this is quite a bit thicker, it still worked up more consistently compared to the Iris, which went so thin in some places, and it was so tightly spun that it did not loft up as I thought it would when compare how fuzzy and lofty it is in some spots. And so for that reason, it goes down to like a number 2 and even a number 1 fine in some areas. And unfortunately I got so frustrated with the first one that I worked up. I wish I had left it in the swatch that I did, but I already took it out and tucked it back inside. So I got an idea for working with this and some tips to help that if you want to use this for a much more cooler weather type of project, that for example you could combine with another type of yarn. And I think this would pair really well with a variety of yarns. You could go with the 100% wool if you like, or you can go, say, with an acrylic yarn. And I have quite a bit of the Lion brand Heartland yarn, and there are just so many beautiful colors that would just work back so well together, and this would give it a lot more substance. And the Lion brand has a sheen, but it's more subtle, and it's not the real super high sheen that plasticky look, and I think that that would work well together. This is a new color, K-O-B-U-K Valley. Heartland, they're named after national parks throughout the United States. Okay, so that was my idea. And as far as the Blue Ridge goes, if you wanted to do that, this is the color Olympic. I think that would be quite beautiful. Or if you wind up getting a cake that is a lot thinner and too light, well then you could save this as a transitional piece going from one season to the next. Also, the stitch that you choose is going to make a big difference. So in this particular cake, I did find several flaws. It's probably tucked in here now, but there was a knot on the top right off the bat. And I am not pleased at all when I see this, particularly one that's really visible to the eye. And so then I wonder what else is lurking inside of this cake. Here's another flaw, for example, where the yarn wasn't even spun. I don't know if it missed the machine or what happens in this process. I'm not super familiar with this process. And I found this happening again where it was very, very separated in one of the projects that I actually am working up, and I'll show you that in a minute. So what I did, rather than cut each and every one out and then have besides all these ends to sew in, to me, one of the beauties of having a large cake to work with is that you can just keep going continuously and not have all these extra joins. So what I did, and I tried, is I just hand spun it and tightened it as I went. And I would do, say I'm working from this end, I would start here, do a little bit of a section and just twist it back and hold that as I'm working it, and I crochet that part, and then I hold that, work with it, crochet the next, and so on. It actually did work up pretty well, and it blended into the rest of the pieces. So that's one thing that you can do rather than cutting it. I tried working with the H hook that this called for. I went down a little bit, and that made the stitches too tight, too flat, and it compressed them so much where it lost a lot of the loft that I would have expected to get out of this yarn. So the H was okay. That was all right, but my favorite stitch, I went up to an I and then a J. So from a 4.5 all the way up to a 6 millimeter, I tried different stitches. I'm going to show you 3 different ones, the H, the I, and the J, okay, in 3 different projects. And I'm really, really happy now with the stitch I chose and the end result for that. But I want to tell you again about another difference here. This is the color Twilight, and when I opened the box and I looked at it, I thought, oh boy, I could just tell from looking at it, this looked much harder. The texture, the feel of the yarn. And that's probably because of the darker dyes. You know how sometimes that can happen. And then sure enough, when I touched it, oh yeah, it is so much more coarse also. I don't know if the dyeing process affected that as well, but it's got that more of that woolly, prickly feel versus a very soft type of yarn that I just wanted to cuddle up with. And feeling it against my skin, it just did not have the same softness and smoothness to it. This was my least favorite, but then I started working it up. I worked up a swatch and I thought, wow, these are really pretty, how the colors are coming out. I thought that was interesting. But I put this against my neck and there's just no way that I could wear this. It was just too prickly. So I think I'm either going to make some little hats perhaps as gifts for these, or I might work back to, again, combining with, say, the Heartland yarn. And combining the two is another way not only to make it thicker if you want to, say, like a bulky yarn. Instead, it's also going to help soften this yarn because there will be less of that prickly wool and more of this softer acrylic. But I do like how the stitches worked up. This one I worked in the 5.5 millimeter hook. Okay, and then one of the other stitches I'm going to compare here side by side, and you can see how much flatter this one is and how choosing your stitch makes such a difference. So if you want something flat, that's great. It's just going to depend on the type of project that you're going for. Now I really like this stitch a lot and might go back to this some other time, use it for something else. I thought it was very pretty, and I love how it showcases the colors and to me gives so much visual interest. But it's very flat, it's very thin. I think this is in an H 5 millimeter hook. I went up to an I and the stitches were just way too open, but if you live in a more moderate climate, maybe that would work for you. You can see the difference here in the thickness, the texture, the loftiness of the stitches that I chose versus compared to this other one in the Blue Ridge, and how much flatter that it is. Hopefully you can see that okay. I've already gone through one whole cake. I found one flaw. It was a knot just like this one here. The price point, I think they're $7.99 a cake, so for 7 ounces, 419 yards, that is extremely reasonable. I just would have preferred a little more consistency, a little less flaws in this, but even with that being said, I'm really enjoying this yarn in the Blue Ridge. I want to show you a couple of other things too with this. All right, when I brought this one out, this is the exact same stitch. However, I went up yet one more hook size. This is the one that I did in the J 6 millimeter hook. And with my beginning chain, even up one more hook size, 6.5 to the K hook. One thing about going up that extra hook size is that this really opened up the stitches, and I think you really could go up if you wanted something more open and lacy and drapey again for not so frigid climate in the winter time, or transitioning into different seasons, and that's going to create a more open lacy effect. You see what I mean? Here and here, there, there. Okay, and you're going to have this all throughout. So that gives a completely different look. And what I found working vertically in the shorter rows, you get more of a transition with your colors and you see more of the full spectrum of them, and gives a beautiful, beautiful blending effect. Whereas working in the longer rows, get more color pooling, more of a self-striping effect. However, the color changes are fairly short regardless, and I still think this is quite nice. It just works up a little bit differently, so that way you can decide which look that you want for which project. And this is from the same cake. It was easy to work with. It glided on the hook. It was very smooth. It is a yarn that will tend to catch on itself when you go, if you make a mistake, have to pull it out and you go to frog it. So for that reason, You know, it's not real forgiving in that way. I just say be really careful with your stitches. Try not to make a lot of mistakes, because if you have to pull out a big area, just take your time pulling that out. Go slowly. Okay, and as I do with yarns like this, rather than pulling from out here, I pull closer to the base, which allows me more control, and there's going to be less tension on the yarn. And how well it frogs will also depend on the stitch, but see, here we go already. That got hung up a little. When you're pulling yarn from the skein, do it in the same fashion that when you're taking out a mistake. Pull from closer to the base, and don't pull out too much at a time, because on this iris, this yarn for some reason curled on itself really badly before I even started working with it. And then I found that the more I had to frog it and redo it, the more I pulled on it, the worse that it curled. Okay, well that's it, my fiber friends and family. I know it was a lot on this yarn, but I wanted to cover all the aspects once I worked it up and discovered all these different things, in case this is something that you've been contemplating getting or already have and got frustrated with it. Please come back, like, share, subscribe, and comment if you haven't already. All right, take care until next time. Bye for now.